And what you're about to hear is Edward's conversation with Stan Martin, who was a True News supporter, contacted us today. He's passing on information that was relayed to him. So, I mean, this is secondhand, third-hand information. I want you to understand that. But it's important that you hear this, because this is how bits and pieces of information is leaking out of China, that we're able to build a picture of what is really going on. So watch this, and then we'll be back in just a few minutes.
Mr. Martins, you had an employee that just came back from China. Can you start from the top and explain to me what this employee told you about the quarantine and the origin, the potential origin of that, of the coronavirus in China?
Yes, Edward, thank you. I have an employee who flew to China approximately January 11th, intending to spend some time with her family for Chinese New Year's. And she intended to spend 4 weeks there. When the story broke about coronavirus approximately January 24th, 25th, she was able to reconsider and cut that vacation short and come back to Canada. Now, she arrived back in Canada on February 3rd and just completed 15 days of self-quarantine in her home. So when she returned to work yesterday, I took the opportunity to speak to her face-to-face about her experience on the ground in Chengdu. So what she conveyed to me that I had not heard before is that through her connections on Chinese social media and what the people in the community were talking about, there is an understanding about the level 4 biohazard lab in Wuhan. And there is an understanding among the community there that there's a so-called patient zero who got the infection from the lab. First of all, she said, nobody in China thinks that this infection came from a meat market. So the understanding through social media is that a person became infected at the lab, and she used the term patient zero.
Oh, it's incredible to use that term, because patient zero context is the first person that had the viral version of coronavirus, which has now started the epidemic in China. And you're again referring to the bioweapons lab that's based in Wuhan.
That's correct. So she said patient zero is reported to be an employee of that lab. The person passed away. Patient 1 was a worker at the funeral home who handled the body. Patient number 1 picked up the corona infection, and what is being reported is that one of the symptoms was pressure in the eyes, and that led this patient 1 from the funeral home to seek medical treatment from the ophthalmologist in Wuhan. I believe his name was Dr. Li, who's now deceased, unfortunately. And of course, Dr. Li tried to sound an early warning about it.
Now, she is basing this information off of what she was told during the visit, but also what she saw on social media. So we don't necessarily know the validity of this, but people in China are talking about it. And as you noted, they believe that not only did the virus originate from this controversial bioweapons facility in Wuhan, but the first patient, which would indicate it leaked from that facility, the first patient came from the bioweapons lab.
Yes, that is widely believed, and she also noted that nobody in China believes the official statistics or the official death toll or anything of that nature.
Now, the next part I wanted to discuss was there was an exodus of Chinese citizens from Wuhan as the quarantine was being announced, the shutdown of travel around January 23rd. About 5 million Chinese citizens and others escaped the city to other parts of China, reportedly even around the world. There was a news crew, for example, from CNN that was able to get out of the country right before the quarantine was put in and the city was placed on lockdown. Now, how has China, according to this Chinese employee that had visited there, how has China tracked those individuals?
So she said the people of Wuhan had about 24 hours notice that their city was going to be locked down into quarantine. And she said about, indeed, as you said, 5 million people left. She said the reason that the number is well known is because the government tracks their mobile phone usage. So there are millions of phones registered to Wuhan, and 5 million of them are not located in city limits at this moment.
My, because they're using the cell phones, the individual cell phones, as tracking devices.
Yes.
I don't think George Orwell could even thought of something so diabolical in this sense. So they know, based off those phones that I'm sure they can now track, and in part are probably connected to the social credit system that China has already implemented, that those individuals have dispersed far and wide. Now, you mentioned to me that the death statistics and those infected, that number is also being questioned. What did she say about that?
Well, she said there are media reports in China of high-profile celebrities who have passed away, and what their stories are, and how devastating the virus has been to their families. And so that's just somewhat of anecdotal evidence of how wide and far-reaching the virus has affected their society. And that's leading them to believe that the statistics are vastly understated.
Now, in regard to the quarantine itself, there has been reports that there's been a shortage of groceries, supplies in some cities. What was her experience while she was there? And is it true that most Chinese are not allowed to leave their home? They're under some form of not just a quarantine, but even a curfew.
Yes, so many people live in high-rise apartment buildings, and her family of origin is in such a building. She said each household is assigned one residency card, and in order to leave the building, one member of the family must carry that card to be allowed out, to go do their grocery shopping, and then to return to that specific building. I did ask her about the grocery situation as well. She said the stores in her particular city of Chengdu were well stocked with meat and vegetables. Where they are running into shortages is around medications. So there's absolutely nothing on the shelf to control a fever right now. And she also said her elderly mother is diabetic, and insulin is being rationed at this point, simply because not enough people have returned to work to produce it at regular levels.
That's incredible. If they're seeing shortages in medical supplies in China, and China is one of the main hubs for not just America, but most of the world to get pharmaceutical products, that definitely could be a clarion bell for shortages to come in the West for medical products. You mentioned unemployment. A lot of people are anxious about getting back to work, according to social media postings, videos, interviews that are even being done with those in quarantine or coming out of the country. What did she say about that? And what is the prospect of individuals not just not returning to work, but running out of money itself because they're not working?
Well, she said it's a very agonizing decision for people in general, and she spoke about her sister in particular around returning to work now that the holiday season is over. On the one hand, they've been conditioned to remain in their home and respect the quarantine, but on the other hand, they're being ordered to go back to work. And so they're weighing the issue of the odds of getting sick versus the odds of unemployment without a safety net.
Now, the individuals that are potentially not going to work, and Wuhan being, again, the epicenter of this, they can't go to work. They also can't travel. Did she talk about checkpoints on highways forcing those with a Wuhan license plate to essentially become a pariah and be forced to go back to the city where coronavirus started?
Absolutely. Excellent choice of words. She said the people of Wuhan have become somewhat of pariahs in their own country. She did mention door-to-door checking in her city for people who are sick, and in particular looking for people from Wuhan who are taking shelter in homes or whatever. And also the vehicles from Wuhan being identified with certain license plates are coming up to checkpoints. So there are, at boundaries of major cities, there are major concrete blockades on the road. There are checkpoints. Medical people take temperatures. And if a particular household is from Wuhan, as identified by their license plate on their car, they are pointed back in the other direction in order to go back where they came from. But all of these cities are barricaded, and so she said there are reports on social media about people stranded on highways going back and forth between checkpoints and not being admitted to stay anywhere.
Well, social media has been one of the main places for information to leak out about what's actually happening in China. One thing that, of many that's been very troubling to watch is the mass spraying of an unknown substance throughout all the public spaces in China. In addition to this, the use of hazmat-wearing police forces going through areas, dragging away individuals not wearing masks, or even putting locks and clamps on doors of apartment buildings of the infected. Did she personally witness anything like this, the spraying, the police state activity, or any of the activity by the police?
She did not talk to me about any spraying or have any knowledge of the substance, but definitely the door-to-door searches for sick people is something she talked about. She talked about, interestingly, her flight back to North America went through Shanghai. So in the departure airport, there were no biohazard measures visible to her. But when she got back to Shanghai, the passengers filed out of the plane, and there were people in biohazard suits on the tarmac taking temperatures of the passengers right on the spot. And there was a family on the plane from Wuhan, and they were directed to go to a different place than the rest of the passengers.
Oh, that's incredible what you just shared, because we've heard reports that there have been no passengers, no individuals, citizens specifically from Wuhan, let alone China, Shanghai, Beijing, and other cities, but Wuhan, that have been able to leave the city since January 23rd. You're saying on her flight, at the beginning of February, she was not only able to get to Shanghai, but to a major city in Canada. That is incredibly troubling, and it appears that they at least did some kind of medical treatment and quarantine procedures on the tarmac. We're hearing in America, Stan, that they're not doing any of those procedures at the major airports in this country, major hubs with direct flights from China.
So at the departure point, those measures were in place. So just to be clear, the people from Wuhan had boarded in a different city, not Wuhan. Wuhan was their place of origin, and they were segregated and not allowed to go further. My employee had her temperature taken. She was passed and allowed to board back to North America. And interestingly, she said the flight attendants were very well suited up on the flight home.
Well, my last question to you, Stan, as a fellow colleague of this employee that did do some self-quarantine but now has come back to work, are you worried that this individual not only could infect other employees in your building, in your office, but yourself could be potentially exposed to the coronavirus by this individual that's come from China?
Based on what I know about the maximum incubation period being around 14 days, I did have in mind to order her to quarantine herself at home. I was a little bit of an early adopter of that, and she solved the problem for me by volunteering to do it herself. So she did quarantine herself at home for 15 days. So I'm reasonably satisfied that that is enough and that my team is safeguarded.
Well, Stan, this is my last question. As a believer, how have you responded to the outbreak of the coronavirus? And are you praying before you go to work? Are you praying for your employees? Like, how has it affected you and your family?
I do pray for my employees, and I do. My team delivers technical services to an essential sector in society, and I'm very concerned about how my team will continue to operate if coronavirus comes here. And so, in a sense, I watch True News and I see what's happening in China, and I worry that that is an early template of what's going to happen here. And so, I want my team to be able to work remotely. Test their access rights now. I am counseling them on a personal level to stock up on some canned fruit and some things for their home groceries, just in case of a supply chain disruption. Where I live is very far from the fruit trees in California, and so that's just being prudent, in my opinion. And, I do, try to cultivate a sense of duty around the essential services that we provide, and just taking their responsibilities seriously.
Oh, thank you so much for your time, Stan.
Thank you.